if that's true, it's certainly something to be concerned about if you're the Clippers, because as you said, we saw what happened in San Antonio. And also you wonder, Skip said that Kawhi was bothered that he felt they misdiagnosed and underplayed the extent of the knee injury. You wonder if he also is feeling like, well, they kind of pushed me to play in back-to-backs this year. I had my own pattern and I was fine in the postseason, but they pushed me to play in back-to-backs, and now look at this, I get injured. So you wonder, is that in the back of his mind as well? I think a couple things we need to remember, though. He does have his own medical guys and trainers that he consults and works with, too. And we know that Steve Ballmer, the owner of the Clippers, will spare no expense for his basketball team. So it would be hard for me to imagine that the Clippers have a subpar medical staff. Now, Skip also said that Kawhi was going to need surgery in the offseason. If that's the case, I think that helps the Clippers' chances of keeping him, because they're going to have more confidence in him being able to come back as Kawhi Leonard than probably any other team. This isn't Kevin Durant with the Achilles, in my view. Kawhi's had a long history of injuries. He's had, issues with load management in the knee and things like that. So I think if he does need surgery, other teams, they'll still want him, but they may be a little more wary of what he'll look like when he comes back than the Clippers would. So, look, let's get to the crux of the matter. Could he leave this offseason? Possibly. Miami, I don't know. But if I'm Kawhi Leonard, there's no reason whatsoever to leave. You're at home in Southern California. You're playing for a legitimate championship contender. They're proving that while you're out right now. Yep. You've got one of the top coaches in the league, and you've got an owner that will spend money to get a championship. So what else do you need? If you really have issues with the training staff, then go to Steve Ballmer and talk to him and say, hey, just share your concerns. I'm sure he'll work with you to do what you need to keep you in L.A.
Right. And look, this is no news right here. Actually, this is universal across all sports. Probably 80 to 85% of most pro athletes have a problem with the medical staff, because the medical staff, they get paid by the team and the owner. They don't get paid by you. So what are they doing? They're always protecting their interests. I was actually just talking to a former NFL player, and he was telling me a story with a particular team and how they marked his injuries. They were actually setting up their workers' comp case. They're like, man, I had an Achilles injury, but they start covering it as a foot injury, because if it's an Achilles injury, now when you go to workers' comp, they got to deal with the whole leg. And so the money around that goes from potentially a $50,000 payout to a $300,000 payout. And they had to go to court with this, and the player ended up winning. So this is universal. And here's the deal. Like you brought up Steve Ballmer. Steve Ballmer, this is what's happening right now if these reports are true. Everyone in that organization, including Steve Ballmer, running to Kawhi, they're going from the Claw and calling him Kawhi or whatever nickname they have for him. They're saying, Mr. Leonard, what do we need to do? Tell us what we need to do. You just saw on the other side of town with the Lakers, they fired their guy. You're talking about AD having the same issues going back to the bubbles, and we can't get this guy better? All right, bye. And that's the way to do it. And you see this with other teams. Now, the problem, Nick, is some of these teams, they have these people in these medical positions that have been there for 20, 25, 30 years. And medical and the science and technology is getting better, and they're still stuck in the 80s. So they need to figure it out across the board, because this is a universal problem.
So I hear you, and I do understand, particularly in the NFL, there does seem to be an adversarial relationship quite often between player and team medical staff. That exists less so in the NBA, and usually it's because the guys are actually, their incentives are typically aligned, which is both parties want to get back on the court as soon as possible, and both parties don't want to risk long-term health, particularly for a guy like Kawhi, who is the franchise player, who the Clippers do expect and hope and believe is going to be there for the remainder of his career, or at least another 4-year max contract. So usually guys are on the same page. Not always, but usually. But we can't disregard the history here, Wilds. And the history here is a player who we've seen this story before, right? Like, this is what caused the fallout in San Antonio. And San Antonio was a place where everyone adored Pop and the Spurs organization. And then Kawhi essentially missed an entire season that, if you remember those Greg Popovich press conferences, he seemed perplexed. He was like, I don't know. At this point, I guess Kawhi's not coming back. And I feel like this entire, he's out with a knee, it's a sprain. I hear it's an ACL. It's not. Is he traveling with the team? No. Is he at the game? Yes, but he's in the box. And now that it's, that ostensibly his people are talking to Skip, I mean, we know who Kawhi's circle is. It's just an odd way that this is being handled. And the only thing that's not odd about it is it feels like we saw this exact same story, just with slightly different, nouns, play out in San Antonio. And so I think Kawhi's a handful. I think Kawhi, as quiet as he is a lot to deal with inside the building as far as managing what he wants, and is he even communicating exactly what he wants. And to the point, Brandon was making, he does have them where the Clippers have no leverage. If he walks, Wilds, they're screwed. They have no draft capital. They have no salary cap. They'd have some room if he walked, obviously. But they have to have him back, and they seem like they are totally, just dead to whatever you want. And I don't know if anybody knows what Kawhi wants. And obviously, he's the only one who knows how he feels.
Yeah, I mean, he plays everything close to the vest. And I agree with Broussard. I don't think he wants to go anywhere. I think he's pretty happy in LA, to be honest with you. This is the first sort of friction that we've heard outside of sort of last year's calamities, where he had his own locker room and things like that. But overall, this hasn't been a drama-filled tenure for Kawhi. Here's the thing, Brandon. I'm okay with all of it. I think the joke is on the media if there's any hand-wringing over, like, Kawhi cares more about his health than maybe, the average fan does about theirs. Like, if I was on the Clippers, I'd be out there every day. Like, no, you wouldn't. You just wouldn't. So I'm totally fine with, honestly, Kawhi Leonard treating his career and his workload more akin to a starting pitcher. And I know he was the face of load management, and that became a bad word. It's just poor marketing. Like, no one's making Clayton Kershaw pitch on 3 days rest. And be like, oh, Kershaw won't pitch on 3 days rest, load management. Does he even care about winning? Like, it's like, yeah, because we've all accepted in baseball that there is a certain limit to how much guys can play. And it's not every guy. I understand LeBron can play for 120 games every year and play in the Olympics and keep going and going and going. Not every guy's like that, and I don't think it's fair to be like, Kawhi's not built like that. So be it. The guy wants to win. I think it's unfair to question it. He's going to conduct his career and workload different from everybody else, and that's fine.
Right. Yeah, Kawhi, I just can't imagine him even thinking about leaving. You've won league MVP. You've won NBA, the Finals MVP. You won 2 championships. What else is there left for you to do? You're back home. You bought an amazing house on the beach. When you get to a point as a player where it's like, you know what? Now it's about balance. Now it's about trying to have everything. And look, this whole injury thing and medical staff, it's a conflict of interest. We're talking about, a billion-dollar industry with multi-million-dollar athletes. That's why you see the LeBron Jameses of the world and the Kawhi Leonards of the world, the Tom Bradys of the world have their own medical team, their own trainers. Russell Wilson has his own team. It's a conflict of interest. We're talking about guys like It's hard for me to articulate and go deep into it because it will take 30 minutes. But you're talking about guys that come into that athletic training room and their focus is, I wish we had more time because I'm super passionate about it, but the medical staff is being paid by the owner. So they're doing everything
to get back on the field.
In the interest of the owner and the player. It's just a totally different approach. So it's a conflict of interest from the beginning.
I think that's right, but Broussard, I think the other factor of this is Wildes' point is well taken, but we don't have to hold Kawhi to the LeBron standard. If LeBron is on one end of the spectrum as far as health, durability, and can you rely on him at the end of the season, no matter what the workload was, this year notwithstanding, then when you're talking about the Clippers' ability to win a championship, Broussard, we do have to bake into it that Kawhi's on the other end of that spectrum. And one of the reasons the Clippers are so out of gas is because they were the 4 seed. And they had a brutal round 1 series and then a brutal round 2 series. And I think when you're, and I'm trying to help you out here, Mr. Clipper, when you're making your picks for next year, you're going to have to, even if Kawhi's there, factor in, well, how good of a regular season will they have if they have to load manage Kawhi at a higher level than any other player in the league outside of maybe Kyrie? So that is part of this, too, is that this is now, over the last 4 years, we've seen that Kawhi's, as you put it, he's like an old 29, and he was an old 26. And how much is that going to impact his ability to make it to the end of the season when they are playing every other day and they do need you for 40, 42, 44 minutes a night?
No, and here's something else to factor in, Nick. This could all be a negotiating ploy, too. Look, we know the money's not an issue. He's getting the max contract. But could this be about, well, look, he's unhappy. You better give him a no-trade clause. You better give him those extra perks that we wanted in the beginning that he got last year, but not this year. He may not practice as much. We want that, stipulated. So this could be negotiating. So, and then to your point, Nick, what if they go back to last year and Kawhi's not practicing as much and he's not as much a part of the team, but the Clippers have to agree to that verbally to keep him? Then you got a problem. Look, and I love Kawhi. You guys know he's a great player. But
what's the problem?
If I'm the Clippers and I sign Kawhi, it's not out of the question that I sign him, and at some point I may look to move him because he is very high maintenance. But I got to get him signed because if I move him, I'm getting a ton back. But he's very high maintenance.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from First Things First, or go watch a few segments from our other shows on FS1.